Today I'm going to turn another crotch bowl. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today I've got this beautiful piece of live oak that just came down yesterday, and it is wet, heavy, and it happens to be in the form of a crotch. So there's going to be some really cool patterns inside this bowl, and I'm really excited to get started with it. I'm going to tell you all about it as I'm turning, but first I'm going to bring it over to the lathe, and we're going to get this more into a round shape that we can get on the lathe a little bit easier. So I'm going to jump over to the bandsaw and we're going to get started.
Actually, before we jump over to the bandsaw, I'm going to show you how I cut this apart. Now, this is the Y section of a branch, and I'm bringing the saw through the entire section all in one direction. So what I don't want to do is I don't want to flip this over and try to cut it from the other side and make the two sides match. That hardly ever works. I lift it up on these other logs so that the chain doesn't accidentally hit the ground. You definitely don't want that to happen. And then when I'm almost cut through, I like to just unzip it, and I'll pull the blade through there, and you can see these two pieces are almost identical to each other. So now we've got two blanks to work with. Okay, now we'll head over to the bandsaw, and we're going to go ahead and cut the shape out of this. Kind of lining it up, getting a good idea where the base will fit. Now these are discs that I make. They're cardboard discs, and I have them for each inch from about 6 inches up to 20 inches or so. And I just go around the perimeter of each one of these pieces of cardboard. I'm not trying to keep it right up against the cardboard, but this is just a nice guide for me to be able to create a nice circle blank to start with. You want to take your time with the bandsaw. Now I've got a video all about bandsaw safety, and you want to check that out if you haven't worked with the bandsaw, or if you're not quite sure about what to do. Check out this video, and I think you'll see some great information as far as keeping yourself safe at the bandsaw. Just going to take my time and take these limbs off. Obviously, trying to turn that the way it was on the lathe would be pretty ridiculous. It would be moving all over the place. Now, this is going to be a very unbalanced blank because of the shape of it, so it's still going to create a lot of vibration on the lathe, and I'll have to turn at a much slower speed as well. There we go. We'll remove that template, and now we've got our circular crotch bowl blank. You can see the beautiful pattern in there. Now this tree, I don't know the age of it. It's not super old. There's heartwood in it, which indicates that it's got some age to it, but it's not a lot of heartwood. I'm going to chisel away the loose bark on the top here where I'm going to attach my drive center. I like mounting this to the lathe with between centers because that gives me the flexibility to move it and make adjustments. I especially want to make adjustments for the wings, and I want to make sure those wings are all lined up with each other. I don't want one of the sides of the bowl to be a lot taller than the other sides. So I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to bring the tailstock up, and then I'm going to line up these wings like I mentioned. So I'm going to use a device here. I'm going to check right below the bark there. I'm going to kind of indicate, see where we're at here on one wing. And then I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back around to the next one. That lines up really nice. And that's a little high. So you can see how that wing would be taller than the other two. So I'm going to go ahead and loosen the tailstock and make just a really subtle adjustment there until these are all lined up with one another. It can take a little time to get this right, but it will really pay off in the end so that each of the wings of the bowl are at the same height. It makes it seem very balanced. A blank like this is very unbalanced. It has uneven weight distribution. You want to start your lathe with the lathe off or at the slowest speed and gradually work up your speed. Also, because this wood is so wet, I'm going to be tightening the tailstock on a regular basis because that drive center and the tailstock are going to keep pressing into that wet wood. If I just forget about that, those 2 points are going to loosen up, and best case scenario, the blank wobbles around a bit in the lathe, which that's not good, of course. But worst case scenario, it completely comes loose and comes off the lathe, and we obviously don't want either of those situations, so we're going to keep this nice and tight. Now, I'm working with my larger 5/8 inch 55 degree bevel swept back bowl gouge here to start rounding over this corner. And I just want to start removing material. This is going to help bring the blank into balance, and it will allow me to turn the lathe speed up a little bit faster. Now, it's very uneven surface here, so you can see the gouge is getting kicked around a lot. The way to prevent that is to apply down pressure into the tool rest and then shift your body weight. What I'm doing here is I'm intentionally keeping the gouge on one path, and I'm not letting the bowl blank interfere with that path. You have to be a little bit careful because you only want to cut away or slice away a small amount of material. If you try to get too aggressive here, you're going to have a lot of issues. You'll be fighting the blank. So you're basically going to shave away one pass at a time to get down to the next layer. And every tree species is different. There will be tree species where you can take a bigger bite and you can remove a lot more material when you're just hogging out this material like at this point and just removing waste material. There will be other species that are harder and more dense, and they're going to fight you. Like this is live oak. The grain pattern and the medullary rays in this, which we'll talk about that a little more in just a bit, but the grain of this and the density of this is not allowing me to cut a large amount of material away quickly. So I have to kind of gauge how deep my gouge is based on the tree species as well. I need to keep that in mind. Just take your time here, and eventually you start working through those rough spots and you start getting a continuous cut all the way around the bowl, and it's a lot easier to make a smooth pass when that occurs. Remember, keep your bowl gouge pointed in the direction of your cut. I have it tilted to the left, and I'm moving from the right to the left up to the rim. Now, I want this to be a live edge bowl. I don't know if that's going to be possible. I'm going to go ahead and flatten out the face of this. I want to get a nice flat face surface here so that I can create the tenon and shoulder for this bowl. I'm going to use my dividers to mark the diameter of the tenon. I'm just touching the left side. You never want the right side to touch because obviously it'll flip itself over, and we don't want that. The dividers are kind of sharp too, and we don't need them flying at us. That would not be a pleasant experience. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my tenon down to that depth. Then I'm going to go ahead and make a couple more passes and create the shoulder. Now I like to create the tenon and shoulder. That's my personal preference. You can do whatever works best for you. The tenon and shoulder give me a lot of options later for changing and adjusting the foot of the bowl, and also the size, the shape. It gives me a lot of room, wiggle room in the bottom of the bowl when I'm working the interior. For some reason, I miscalculate the depth of the bowl. I've got a lot of extra material there. Okay, you can see here as I was working up the sides, if I continued, I'm just going to rip this bark off. So what I'm going to do, and you've seen me do this before in other live edge bowls, instead of working with the supported grain cut direction, I'm going to go against the supported grain cut. Now, if you're hearing me say supported grain cut and you're thinking, what in the world is that? You guessed it, I've got a video all about it, and it is super important. If you don't understand what supported grain cut is right now, there's a chance that you turn sometimes and you get these really smooth bowls and it looks great, and there's other times when you seem to be doing everything the same way except your bowls turn out really rough. Well, there's a good chance that you went against the supported grain direction, and that will cause issues. I've got the top wings cut. Now I just got to start shaping. I need to connect the bottom of the bowl to the top wings, and you can see there in the left top, that corner needs to be removed. I don't want this to be a corner bowl like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start making some more passes here to establish the curve up at the top wings. That looks really good. All three of the wings have their edges established, and because I did that unsupported grain direction, I pushed down from the bark into the wood, so the bark didn't rip away there. Had I gone the other direction, that bark would have just ripped away. Now I'm going from the base up to the top, and this is the supported grain direction. So anyway, check out the video on the supported grain cut. It's a really important thing to understand. Got a little too aggressive there and had a little skip in the, I actually bound up the turning there for a second. You can see how wet this wood is. The long shavings are coming off. You get long shavings from wet wood. If you think about this, because this is a side grain mounted bowl, that means on each end of the bowl there's end grain. I'm making really light passes here to connect these curves and get this curve to connect from the bottom up to the top. But if you think about that end grain going from on each end of this, well, between that you're cutting side grain. So in the process, when you're slicing between those two end grain sections, the wood can come off as one full shaving. But as you reach the end grain, because that is pretty much dead-ended, it's perpendicular with the direction of the blade, it ends that shaving. So that's why we don't have continuous ribbons of shavings. Like if you're doing an epoxy shaving, there's no grain direction in it, so you have ribbons that come off that are infinite. Well, in this case, our shavings end at the end grain. Each time they come up to the end grain, it dead ends that shaving and you create another shaving. So kind of a fun thing to think about. Things that I think about while I'm turning. I'm liking this curve. It's very nice. I've got a little bit of a bump down here that I need to deal with. I'm going to do a push cut to remove a good portion of that material. But then I'm also going to use a shear scrape to get down closer to that shoulder. Now I've switched over to my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm making a really light pass. I just sharpened this. I've probably sharpened in this turning, I'll probably sharpen this gouge maybe 3 or 4 times because it will get dulled. I'm liking that a lot. There's some nice looking heartwood down there. Now I'm going to use that shear scrape that I mentioned. I'm going to get that bottom curve right below this, or right above the shoulder, and I'm going to curve that into the other portion of the bowl. The shear scrape is just a really light shave that takes away just a little bit of material. It's really good for removing tool marks or connecting two different passes that might have a little bump between them. You can see that bump right there. I still need to deal with that. The way the shear scrape works is you have the flute of the gouge facing the turning, and you drop the handle, and that lower wing is what's doing the shaving here. I've got a video all about the shear scrape too. You're going to want to check that out after this video. All right, it's looking a lot better. And you can take your time and really finesse this. You want to take your time on the exterior of the bowl. Remember, it's the blueprint for the interior, so essentially the exterior of the bowl is the bowl. So the more time you spend here, the better. This being really wet wood though, you don't want to spend too much time because it is going to start to change shape here as we go. And if you're in a dry environment and you're turning really wet wood like this, you may need to move a little bit quicker because this wood's going to try to dry out, especially on the end grain. It's going to start cracking and having some issues. So if you're in a really dry environment, you may have to take breaks. You can also mist the wood with a water bottle, like a spray bottle. And if you have to take a break to have lunch or whatever, you might want to take some shrink wrap or some plastic wrap and wrap the piece really tight on the lathe so that it doesn't lose a ton of moisture while you're gone. But I wouldn't leave a turning like this for more than, I don't know, depends on how dry your environment is. If it's very dry, I wouldn't leave this for more than 30 minutes, believe it or not, because you can come back and have some serious issues with this blank shifting and changing shape. So I'm going to go ahead and reverse this. We've got the exterior done. It's looking really nice. I don't know that I'm going to be able to keep that bark on. The bark is really wet in the cambium layer, the layer that's right underneath the bark that connects the wood to the bark. It is soaking wet, and that is usually a good indicator of how easily the bark will hold if the cambium layer is in good shape. It is really wet and loose right now, so I'm not real confident that I'm going to be able to keep the bark on here. Plus, as this dries and changes shape, it's a little tricky for the bark to move exactly with the wood as it distorts and changes shape. I'm going to take a moment to sharpen my gouge. When I make that slicing cut that's going to define the thickness of the walls up at the top and slice through that bark, I really want to make sure my gouge is good and sharp. So I'm making a good clean cut and I don't accidentally tear off some of that bark. So this is a really good time to stop for a second and sharpen up the blade or the gouge. And what I'm doing is I'm getting up there and I'm establishing the wall thickness. I'm making the bevel of the bowl gouge parallel to the exterior of the bowl. This is what I was mentioning about the fact that the exterior of the bowl is the blueprint for the interior. I'm following the exterior right now. I'm going to go ahead and remove some of this material and then make a ditch area that will allow me to get in there and work that wall. Here I'm going to line up the bevel and make it parallel to the exterior of the bowl. It's kind of mesmerizing watching the different speed here. Now with your eye in real time, it's a little trickier. You can see I've established the wall thickness right there and the bark is intact. When we're doing the supported grain cut on the interior of the bowl, we work from the rim down to the center for a side grain mounted bowl. Again, that might sound really confusing, but check out my video on this supported grain cut because we go over that in detail there. So the issue on the interior isn't so bad as the exterior. The exterior supported grain cut for a side grain mounted bowl is from the bottom up to the top edge, and because we're trying to do a live edge here, it will rip that live bark right off the top of the bowl. So that's why I did that. I switched just briefly for the bark top edge on those exterior wings. But the interior is really nice because you can work from the rim down into the middle and you're pushing that bark down onto the wood. So it's making a nice supported slicing cut across that. And it doesn't typically have a tendency to rip it off at this point. So I'm just working my way down, maintaining that wall thickness and also keeping the center core of this in place. This wood is very wet. I'm making the walls about a 1/2 inch thick, about 12 millimeters, and it's not super thin, but there is flexing in that. So the core material in the center of the bowl here is actually helping to stabilize these wings as I work my way down. Now, I won't return back to the top of those wings for any reason later in the turning. That's, if I do, that will cause problems. You can see as I'm rubbing the bevel here and just picking up the previous cut and then continuing down to remove material until I get to that established wall thickness. Very, very light, and then I'll take more material away here because in that bottom of that cut right there is the thickest portion, and I'm just sneaking up on that wall thickness. I'm going to remove a little more of the core material and just keep working my way down to the bottom of this bowl. The other nice thing about using this technique is I'm using both sides of the bowl gouge. Here I'm using the left side of the gouge, and when I make the wall passes here, I'm using the right side of the gouge. So this gives me a lot more use of the gouge and also requires less sharpening because I'm using two different portions pretty evenly. See, I'm making lighter cuts, and then here I'm just making very light cut because that wall thickness is already established, but down lower it's still thick. So it's a good idea to also just stop frequently and check your wall thickness. And then I'll go ahead and remove more of this center material. And once you get down to the middle, this center core is not necessary and obviously needs to be removed as well. But it's done its job. Those wings are flexing and moving. Now, if I were to decide, oh wait, you know what? I want to go back up there and I want to make this just a little bit thinner. Well, that's how you blow up bowls. Because right now those wings are flexing and flapping, and we don't see it. It's almost impossible for our eye to see that, but they're flexing and flapping, and you put a solid piece of steel up there in the form of your bowl gouge anchored to the tool rest, and that comes into contact with one of those flapping wings. Well, it's probably going to just rip it off. You're definitely going to lose bark, and it will probably just tear off part of one of those wings. So we do not go back up to those wings at this point. And actually, this technique that I use as far as working down the sides, I'm going to switch over to my curved tool rest here. The technique that I've developed, or that I like to use going down these sides like this, is because of this right here of doing live edge bowls. This is why I started doing this. If I had started this bowl and cored the center outward, I would have no support by the time I get to these outer edges. And I did a couple live edge bowls like that, and I tore them up, and it was really frustrating because I spent all this time coring out the center and removing the center, and the sides were flexing and moving around, and they just didn't turn out well. The nice thing about this too is you immediately establish that outside wall thickness, and you decide if it's going to look good and if it's going to work and if the bark's going to stay on, you know right away. And then you can spend the rest of your time removing the center core. It's kind of the reverse of what a lot of people do as far as working from the inside out. I like to work from the outside in. So anyway, I've just taken that whole process and adapted it for all of my turning, because why not? It helps you quickly establish the wall thickness. You've got this center core that's helping stabilize the whole bowl as you're turning. And for me, it's a lot easier. Plus, making these little concentric circles is kind of mesmerizing, and I like doing that. Yeah, it's really fun seeing these. So now, once you get down to the center like this, there's basically, you're just removing and getting right down to the bottom of the bowl at this point. But you want to maintain that wall thickness all the way down. Each pass I'm doing here, I'm following the same curve that is the shape of the outside of the bowl. So once I've removed enough passes, I should be right on line as far as the curve of the bowl and pretty much have it all set up. This is my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I've just sharpened it so it's making nice clean passes here. And I'm just removing small amounts of material. We don't want to get aggressive here. This is not a clearing cut or a we're not hogging out material. We're making a nice finishing cut here. There's a little bit of a hump there, so I'm going to back up just a little bit, rub the bevel, make a really light pass here, and blend all of those cuts together into one final interior curve. You can tell by the thinness of these shavings coming off here that I'm just removing a small amount of material. And don't press through that center bottom. You can rip out fibers there and you'll have a little divot in the inside of your bowl. So you don't want that. You want to just take your time, let the tool do the cutting. Remember, the center of the bowl is making the slowest rotation speed there. So you have to wait just for a moment to let your tool do the cutting. Really got the shavings built up there. I've got just a little nub, and I'm going to let the tool just lightly cut that off. All right. All right, that's looking really good. Okay, I'm going to reverse this now. I'm going to switch chucks. I was using a little bit larger chuck, and I'm going to go down in chuck size. And I'm going to use one of my jam chucks. Jam chuck is just a piece of scrap wood that's shaped in a variety of different sizes. I'm putting a piece of high density foam in between the bowl and the jam chuck just so that they don't rub and cause issues with the inside of the bowl. Then I'll bring my tailstock up and I'll hit that point where the tailstock was initially, and it will be lined up at that point. Then I'm ready to go ahead and start shaping the foot of this. I'm going to take the shoulder down a bit and the tenon. I'm going to blend those together to become the foot of the bowl. I don't need the foot to be super huge. I'd like to be stable so this could be used for something functional such as fruit or something like that. There's a little bit of an edge there, and that can be cleaned up with just using the simple pull cut or a shear scrape. Switch over to my heavier 5/8 inch bowl gouge here. I was getting a little bit of chatter. Remember, if you're hearing chatter from your tool, that's because it's me leaving tool marks. And actually there are tools that you can buy that are called chatter tools that intentionally leave patterns and marks on your turnings. Well, when any tool starts chattering, that means it's leaving marks, and you probably don't want that. So you can switch over to a heavier tool like I just did. That was the 5/8 inch. Now I'm back on the 1/2 inch gouge here, and the 1/2 inch is just a little bit smaller. It gives me a little bit finer cut, a little bit more refined, and I like using that in those situations, and for removing the inside of the foot here. So I'm going to square away the side of the rim, the base of the rim rather. I'm going to move my tool rest and get it just in the right position. You always want to make sure your tool rest is positioned right, and the thing to keep in mind is the cutting point of your bowl gouge should be on the center line. That's how you adjust your tool rest. So I'm going to remove material on the inside of this foot. And take a look at that because I had a little chunk that seemed like it wanted to jump out there. And then I'm going to do a back cut so that I can make the inside of this foot the same thickness as the walls. It's a good idea, especially with a piece of wood that's wet like this, to make all of the walls evenly thick. And that's going to allow for even drying so that it won't distort dramatically or worse, crack. If you leave any portion of the bowl very thick compared to other thin areas, the thin areas are going to dry quicker and you're going to have problems. So we don't want that. So we want to maintain an even wall thickness everywhere. So that even means making the shape of the foot roughly the same thickness as the wall so that they're even with one another. Just going to take my time and remove material here very delicately. Now there's lots of times when I have the flute open, meaning it's faced upward. That can work as long as you're making really light cuts. If you get aggressive, you can get a really bad catch that way. So right here you can see it's open, but I'm basically just rubbing that front bevel and not letting it get too aggressive. Now I'm going to switch over to my spindle detail gouge. Spindle detail gouge has a little bit sharper point, so it allows me to get in here a little bit better. I just had something, I had bark fly off of here, unfortunately. And we had the bark all the way up to this point, and unfortunately it's going to have to come off because there was a pretty good section that just blew off of this. So disappointing when that happens. It looks better with the bark, but you can't always do that. So it's all right. This will become a natural edge bowl. So I'm going to go ahead and apply pressure with the spindle detail gouge and then turn off the lathe, and it will cut that little nub. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take that off the chuck, the jam chuck. Oh, it's a little stuck there. I'll have to cut that. Here you can see the bark came off in the top of that crotch section right there. It just blew out. So disappointing. But like I said, it's all very loose. You can see how quick it's coming off. It was going to come off one way or the other. Whether it was now or later, it was not going to stay on there for very long. And there's some of the cambium layer that's staying in there. Once this bowl dries, I can sand off that cambium layer and it should be fine. You just take your time and it works its way loose. You can hear the disappointment in my voice. I'd rather keep that bark on there, but it's just not gonna happen on this one. So this is a natural edge bowl instead.
So here it is, a beautiful live edge, no, natural edge bowl. There was a great big section up here that was coming loose of the bark, and I thought about gluing it, but it was so soaking wet that it's going to dry and contract and it's going to break anyway. So I went ahead and removed all of that bark. There's a little bit of the rough cambium layer underneath here. That'll sand, and I'll sand all of this once this wood is dried a bit. But for right now, we're just going to let this dry and I'll come back and sand that. Now, when you sand the edge for a natural edge bowl, you want to sand with that edge. So for instance, up here, I'm going to have the sander like this, but when I come around the side, I'm going to bring it around the side. I pretty much want to mimic the angles that are there. I don't want to kind of flatten those off. It doesn't look very good that way. So you want to match the existing angles. Now, one of the disappointing things with this, I was hoping for this heartwood to show all the way through here. And because this branch, it was a big branch, but it was relatively young, there wasn't a lot of heartwood in the center of that. So when I split that log directly in half, I only put a little bit of heartwood on each side. In hindsight, what I could have done is I could have cut that log a little bit off center and left the pith into this turning. That way I can use the area where the base is going to be and let the pith be in there. Now I know that sounds controversial, there might be some cracking on the base, but I know there's going to be movement and cracking here anyway. What would have happened is if I had left this one side wider and used that as the blank and kind of discarded the other half, I would have had that heartwood up more in the center here, and I would have had this, actually probably would have been a heart-shaped heartwood in here too, but it didn't quite come through like that because there was so small amount of heartwood. So that's something to keep in mind if you've got a small amount of heartwood in your bowl, to possibly cut it and split it, not centered, but off center just a little bit. All in all, I think it turned out pretty good. What do you think? Do me a favor, leave me a comment, let me know what you think of this. Let me know if you're going to turn a natural edge crotched bowl yourself now that you've seen this video. And while you're down there, do me a favor and click that like button. Thank you. Be sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribing, and check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there I've got courses on everything you need to know about turning wood bowls. So check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy turning.